Welcome to MasterMined, the behavioral health business podcast. We go beyond the clinical to explore what it really takes to build, grow, and lead a successful behavioral health organization. Each episode features candid, practical conversations with industry leaders, offering strategies to scale your business while staying true to your mission. From branding and marketing to leadership, culture, and compliance, we cover the tools you need to balance care and commerce with confidence. MasterMined is brought to you by Snapshot, a digital agency on a mission to serve with heart, execute with excellence, and build something bigger together. And now, welcome to MasterMined.
Hey everyone, welcome back to MasterMined. I'm Lee Pepper, author of Never Outmatched, and sitting beside me is my co-host Jeff Skillen, founder of Skillset Enterprises.
Hey Lee, how often do we meet somebody who might have more frequent flyer miles than us?
It's not often, Jeff, but I am so excited today that we're joined by Ben Seymour, partner at Southworth Associates. Ben has worked in the behavioral health and substance use disorder field for more than 2 decades, beginning as a technician in 1999 and later serving as a counselor, program founder, consultant, and interventionist. Now at Southworth Associates, Ben coordinates programs that support high-level professionals, including physicians, nurses, and lawyers in recovery and compliance monitoring. We're going to explore with Ben today his path through the behavioral health field, the unique challenges of working with professionals facing substance use disorder, and how compliance monitoring and the intervention process continue to evolve. Welcome, Ben.
Hey guys, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Boy, 1999. I mean, that's another century, right?
Yeah, it was a long time ago. It's a long time ago.
Yeah, exactly. It is a long time ago.
I had hair back then. But yeah, it was a
For
long
those of
time.
you listening, Ben and then Jeff and I also just rubbed our bald heads.
I guess I need to do that now.
Yeah. So yeah, it's been a long journey.
The first question out of the gate was I wanted Ben to kind of share a little bit of his professional story and how he started out as a behavioral health technician.
Yeah. So it started, well, I got sober in 1998, and as a little context, I was 19 when I got sober, and I'd been in and out of institutions trying to get sober, and finally ended up in this last program. And what had happened was I was watching these guys come into work, and I kind of fell in love with this idea of working, being able to take my experience and help other people, and it grew from there. And so I started out as a tech, and the woman who owned the program, who was a mentor of mine, Arlene Rosen, she took chances on me that nobody else on paper should have taken, right? Here's a kid with no prior work history, 11 treatment episodes. Let's give him a job. Nobody's thinking that, except Arlene really saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. And so that's how it started.
And for those of you, this is Arlene Roser, the founder of Michael's House.
Yeah.
And I think that's, what an amazing inspiration. And for those of you that don't know, please Google and go read about her and her son, Michael, and how she founded Michael's House. But how did you remember how you got connected with Michael's House? How did you discover Arlene?
So, I had been through multiple treatment centers. My dad flew for United, and they found it through the EAP at United. And,
wow.
And then I went on, so I went back. I stayed there 4 months, and they said, come back in 18 months, and we'll consider hiring you as a tech. And that, getting behind the scenes and really getting in there and seeing the work that happened and being in clinical staffings, that fueled me to go to school to be a counselor. And everything kind of started from there.
So you stayed there 4 months?
So I was in treatment there 4 months, yeah.
Yeah, see, I think that's something that for our listeners, sometimes, we get stuck in this 30-day model.
Yeah.
This 30 days. And it's really amazing. A lot of the really amazing success stories I hear were people that had the opportunity to really stay engaged with treatment in a longer, situation.
Yeah. And what it did for me, at the time I didn't know this was happening, but what it did for me was, treatment really fulfilled a lot of things. It was connection, community. It created a family structure for me. And so I think that me going back to work as a tech was really a longing to stay close to that. And I think we see that a lot with people in this field who go back to work at the treatment centers they got sober at, or stay involved with treatment in a lot of ways, because it's really filling a connection for us that we didn't have before. And, my passion for this field really grew from that, because seeing the art behind the scenes of the psychiatrists, the clinicians coming together and creating this experience for the people in there. I had no idea how much work was going on behind closed doors for my recovery, And so getting to be a part of that was what fueled it. And then from there, as I went on to be a counselor at Michael's house. And so I stayed there until she sold in 2006. And,
Wow.
But as a result of that, I got to work with all these great interventionists, the old school, original kind of guys, the John Southworths, the Jim Tracys, back in those days, Roger Canaveri and Dave, and they were characters. It was a cast of characters,
Oh,
the
absolutely.
interventionists back then, and that was before the TV show. And so it was not this, widely publicized thing. It was kind of this tongue-in-cheek profession that nobody knew existed, and these guns for hire that would come in by night and do an intervention and have you off to treatment the next day. So that was where I said, I want to learn to do interventions. And my great-grand sponsor happened to be an interventionist, Phil Mangan, and he trained me how to do them. And so I was a counselor at Michael's house by day, and on weekends I was doing interventions. So, yeah.
Well, so help us connect the professional dots from those early days as an interventionist to then Southworth and Associates. I mean, there may be a lot. I mean, I know there's a lot of stories in there.
Yeah.
But help us and our listener understand that sort of evolution.
Yeah, so John Southworth was kind of the godfather of interventions in our industry, right?
Absolutely.
One of the big original guys, and he was a big personality, And John, I moved to Idaho in 2006 after Arlene sold, and started an intervention company. And John was not happy about that. So John did not really like me in the beginning. He was like, "Who's this young kid kind of coming in trying to steal business?"
You actually moved into his backyard.
Yeah, and Michael Walsh looked at me and said, "You really think that's a good idea?" And Jeff Holbrook told me that. So these guys were telling me, "You might want to talk to John and get his blessing first," which of course I didn't do. And so, but after time, John and I built a relationship. I had my child had gotten ill, and long story short, I ended up building treatment centers in Idaho. And John felt less threatened by that, and we really built a relationship over that. And he started referring to me, and really he helped me build my business overnight. John wielded a lot of power and a lot of he could give you the rubber stamp with a lot of really great programs. Overnight I started getting referrals from Pine Grove, Circle Lodge, a lot of the big Karen, a lot of these big programs started referring to my outpatient in Idaho.
So there are people who are listening to this episode who don't have the benefit of having known John Southworth.
Yeah.
How would you describe John Southworth, the legend, the man, to someone who didn't have that privilege?
Yeah, he was, he was somewhat polarizing to some people. He was like, I describe him as bad Santa sometimes. He was just this gruff kind of guy that did not mince words, and some people didn't appreciate. He was really straightforward and was very outspoken about his beliefs. But say whatever you will, John had a loving, giving spirit. He would stop what he was doing at any point, fly any part of the world, and do an intervention. And up until his death, he passed in 2017, and the week before he was in Sri Lanka doing an intervention and got back and looked bad, and that was when we knew he was ill. But he always was going. Christmas, did not take holidays off. I mean, he was all about helping that family in crisis, and he gave charitably of his time and everything. Every intervention he did in Idaho, he did free as part of his living amends for a ninth step. And what he didn't say was half of those Jeff Holbrook and I did for him as favors, but that was the kind of guy he was.
Well, he was so giving because he used to have this famous holiday party.
Yeah.
And you couldn't even offer to, like, can I pay for lunch or can I pay for my cab ride from the airport? No, I mean, it was really fascinating.
Yeah, he flew in 150 people and had a party because that was his family. He was on the road so much, and this field, it's like a family in a lot of ways. We see each other on the road so much more than we're at home sometimes. And it's like, I was just talking about that with my sponsor last night. It's like he's in Nashville, I'm in LA now, and it's like we see each other in Florida more than we do anywhere else. So that's how it is with a lot of my friends.
Yeah.
And I think interventionists have this really unique perspective because you all see every program.
Yeah.
And so I think that creates this fascinating connection you have with families because when you show up, I mean, not only are you having to now deal with the crisis that's in front of you, but you're also learning new information, which may make the original program they thought was going to be a good fit, you now
Yeah.
have new information.
Yeah.
And so you really have a lot, I don't want to say power, it's really, you really have now this education because you've seen so many programs and now you're on the ground.
Yeah.
The families sometimes don't know.
Yeah.
Like they may have just done a quick internet search or gotten a referral, but now can really be a valuable resource.
Yeah. And it's really pivotal now, right? Because the whole field of interventions changed. You know, when I first started, it was drugs and alcohol were really the predominant referrals we were seeing. But now, even with drug and alcohol referrals, mental health is so prevalent. You know, with marijuana, we're seeing psychosis. You know, we're seeing a lot more psychosis in these cases that we're getting, and it's chicken or egg. You know, is this organic psychosis, thought disorder, or is this really a chemically induced, you know, psychosis that we're seeing? And so the skill set of interventionists has to evolve. You know, what we used to be able to do and come in and just read letters. Reading letters isn't appropriate to someone who's actively psychotic. You can read all the heartfelt letters you want, but really you need to have some clinical expertise to get that person to treatment. And therefore, the treatment referral base that you talked about, we need to be more savvy as to who we're referring to,
Yes.
what their capabilities are, who truly does mental health. You know, back in the day when I was working with foundations a lot, you know, it was like I appreciated that about Rob and those guys because, you know, we would show up with someone who was truly bipolar and a lot of programs would say, well, what is this? We can't deal with this. And it's like, this is true bipolar disorder. So a lot of programs now are trying to appeal to mental health, but we got to make sure as interventionists they can really deliver clinically on what that is.
So it's really clear that the counseling background that you had and the clinical education that you had married with your intervention skills has really made you kind of maybe an early unicorn in this space.
Yeah.
What sort of evolution are you seeing in the people that are coming up now, or how are some of the people who've been doing interventions traditionally had to change, and what are they doing to stay relevant?
I think that, you know, changing the model, because I think in the old days there was the Johnson model, which was 2-day model. Come in, we meet with the family, we script out letters, we meet with the individual the next morning while they're getting out of bed and read the letters, and then they're off to treatment in an hour, 90 minutes. That we've had to evolve, you know, and I think we saw all those models come out back when I was getting in, you know, with systemic model where we had Jim Tracy and Bill Maher doing more of a systemic. We do a 3-day workshop with the family, and then we saw Judith Landau and James Garrett back in those days with Arise, and which is really more of a case management, long play kind of intervention. And I've learned from all those guys, and so I think we have to do that as interventionists because in dealing with acute mental health, these are longer play interventions. You know, I had recently had someone who was psychotic but functioning at work and maintaining a job with no financial leverage, no employer leverage, but a family who knew what was really going on. And it took us months to get that individual to go to treatment. And it took the family setting boundaries, ongoing family coaching, you know, really creating a sort of intervention around circumstances and educating that individual as to why the family was concerned through the psychosis. And, you know, there was just, it takes a lot of time and strategy, you know.
Yeah, because I think, you know, to the public, we get jaded because, you know, we'll watch A&E's show, which I think has been very helpful in a lot of ways, but it can only show you a sliver.
Absolutely.
And then, you know, even thinking about, you know, The Sopranos and some of these shows, I mean, they're showing you one little bit. They can't, you know, they've got to condense it down, you know, to a show that's going to be 22 minutes.
Yep.
They can't show you something that may have taken weeks to even get to that point, or then what happens when they're not ready at that point and you've got to continue on for months.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing is really, you know, the family, so much of this burden falls on the family, right? And our job is to put out the biggest fires first and work back from there, right? And so obviously the person who is psychotic or actively using, or especially with fentanyl, right? You know, it's this interesting dichotomy of sometimes we need to act fast and sometimes we need to slow it down. And that's the art of intervention, is really knowing when to do what. And, you know, there's not one answer for it. You know, I'd love to tell you that, you know, this model is the best model, but really we need to be able to implement all these different things. And I think that's what has kept me engaged in, you know, the field of addiction treatment and mental health is I always have something to learn. And we're always coming out with new modalities. And, when I was owning and operating treatment centers, I think that too was the art for me, was learning which interventionists at the time, because I wasn't doing interventions then, is who's really growing with the field, and I think that over time we've got the guys that are, kind of Johnson model guys, true blue alcohol interventionists that just stay in that lane. And I think that's where the ethics come into play, is knowing what are your limitations, what cases can I handle, what cases do I need to refer out. For me, if I know that if I have a female with a lot of sexual trauma, I'm typically going to refer those cases out, because I don't want to recreate those dynamics, right? So it's and exacerbate the symptoms. And so I think that that's where the ethics come into play. That's where education comes into play. And I think that, we really, AIS, I want to give them a shout out, the Association of Intervention Specialists, and Jamie Ader for continuing that mission. In the beginning, we tried to do credentialing for interventionists, and there were so many big egos, and my way is right and this is right, that we used to have the board register of interventionists, and that fell apart because of infighting. And so AIS really was where it took root and has continued to create some standards and education. And I am a certified intervention specialist, and or certified professional interventionist. And so I think that I encourage anyone looking at getting into this field, wanting to know more, is seek out AIS, find a mentor, get in there and really start learning.
So, you're speaking here to obviously your skill, your discernment, your continuing education, which I think is phenomenal information. Let's now talk about, that's been working with the family or the person of concern. Let's talk about the discernment involved in terms of where do you send them? And then learning what programs are suitable, which programs are not suitable. I think this is a pretty rich area where, frankly, you as interventionists are really you're that point of contact for both. And so that requires a lot of trust on both sides of the equation. So how do you balance that?
It's funny. I was talking to a colleague of mine the other day, and her and I were comparing, back in the old days, and I was taught you give 3 referrals, right? And sometimes I think that my job as an interventionist, this family's in crisis. If I give them too many choices, the family can disappear. They get paralysis by analysis, and that backs them into inaction. And so what we were talking about was actually maybe it may be a paradigm shift here, where it's more ethical for us to really say, and I like to at least try to give 2, but all these factors I need to consider: financial, mental health, trauma, addiction. What is going on with this individual? If it's straight SUD, then, it's a little easier. But sometimes I need someone that can deal with the trifecta of trauma, mental health, and addiction. And that not everybody can do that seamlessly and really effectively. So again, I think that they look to us for answers. So we need to know, if they have one shot at treatment, what's the best bang for their buck, and give that referral.
I think that we have lost kind of this tailored personal approach, and maybe it's because the internet has made things so easy, and it's easy to now even go into AI and ChatGPT and look up intervention stuff. But I just always felt like back a few years ago that we would train our admissions team to have relationships with interventionists, right, on a first name basis. And I felt like a lot of the interventionists that we knew, you would know, oh, I'm going to call for Josh. Or I'm going to call for Brett. Like, you knew who to call at that program. And I feel like a lot of programs I go to today, they have lost who to call in the intervention world. And I feel like the same way. I'm not sure, you probably know a lot of people, but I feel like there's a lot of interventionists that they don't have those connections at these programs on a real personal level. And I think that's because we're not doing the lunch and learns like we used to do. We're not really leveraging y'all's knowledge right in the space and inviting y'all to come in. We're still very afraid of I want to be in control. And
and I think that that's the part where you guys did a great job with that, right? But it's an art. You gotta know what type of interventionist, and they need to build rapport with the admissions department. Use us as leverage, because a lot of times I think that admissions people hear a call and they hear, well, the family's just not ready yet. And they leave it at that, and they circle back with them in a week or whatever their follow-up time should be, right? And I think that those are the key opportunities where you can say, listen, I know you're concerned because your loved one's not willing. They're saying no right now, But that's why intervention exists. So I would encourage you to talk to these guys, find out more about the process. And for us, I think that first call is all about education. Of course they're resistant. Nobody wants to go in and give up their life for 30, 60, 90 days and go to treatment. But the intervention process is extremely effective. Here's how. This is why it works.
Yeah, it's almost every call except calls that might have some issue with they wanted to do in network only. It's almost like every other call should be a referral for intervention.
Yeah, and that's the thing where I think now that I've been around longer, I go in and I'll educate programs, right? And I say, let me talk to your admissions department and your clinical team, because I think that too, as the clinical team, I think that a lot of counselors have the idea that they have to be ready, right? I think that kills a lot of people. And I think this idea that it's unethical for us to have an interventionist come in and trick them into treatment, and they don't understand what intervention really is. I think there's a lot of misconceptions.
I think there's a real learning opportunity there, and I can't let this opportunity go by and not sort of address the hobby horse that I love to bring up, which is I try to remind programs that I work with that we are still dealing with people, and people refer to people, not programs. And that's difficult for some programs to understand because they're like, we have this beautiful website and we've got all this great marketing material and look at who we can serve and we can do all of these things. It's like, but at the end of the day, they're going to be like, Ben helped me. Yeah. Ben contacted Josh. You mentioned
it's
you
funny.
mentioned Josh.
Ben mentioned Arlene. Ben didn't say Michael's house.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I didn't want to miss the opportunity, and it is kind of a hobby horse that I bring up because it feels old school even in today when we're talking about AI, but it's like at the end of the day, this is truly a relationship business. Yeah. And when you're talking about getting in front of clinical teams and admissions teams and the education opportunity, let's spend a minute there if you don't mind, because it's like, what do you really want to impress upon them? And it's like, and recognize the value of a relationship and recognize the value of, we're dealing with real people here.
So I think that the key thing with the admissions department is their strength in numbers. I think that them hearing, because I know that the treatment centers I work with, they're going to be telling the family the same thing I'm telling them. And sometimes that family needs to hear a consistent message from a few different people. And for me to say, no, that program is the best program as an objective third party, that's helpful. And they start to trust, okay, this is the right place for Johnny. And I'll talk them through why. And also for them to hear from the treatment center that, no, you need an interventionist so I think that there's this verification process that kind of happens through synergy and collaboration. I think that's our job, is to really work streamlined, lockstep together in admissions and in intervention and the other providers that we need to work with to create a safe experience for the family. Because if we leave cracks, that's where addiction thrives, right? If we leave a crack there, the family's going to get paralyzed and fall into inaction and not take action until the next crisis.
The treatment center said this.
And I just want just to sort of further nail the point. It's like, that call has come into a program. I guarantee you that family now knows the name of the person that is helping them with that admission. That is now no longer the program's name. That is now that admissions person's name. Yeah. So now it's Ben and that admissions person. It's like we now have people helping people.
Well, and I'm always giving a name and a direct contact at the program. Yeah. And back to Lee's point earlier, is we have to have those relationships.
That's where I think a lot of marketing people in this space now, they miss that opportunity because it's like, I want you to have a number. Yeah, I want you to call the number, and the next person that answers the call, they can handle it. And we need to pedal that backwards and just say, here's why that's not particularly effective.
And there's programs I work with that are big, especially as we see more private equity and money come into the space, right? Now that we're a legitimate part of healthcare, we see these bigger systems fall into place. And I think that we lose some of that high touch, intimacy, personal experience. We need that. We need that connection. They need to have a name. So if I'm working with programs, even bigger programs where I know, hey, they're probably going to be told to call the 800 number. They're going to get a random person whoever's on duty. I'm going to call the owner of that program, and luckily I've been around long enough to have those relationships, say, who do you want me to send this call to?
Right.
And they will give me a point person. But I do think that systemically, from like a treatment center operation standpoint, that needs to be done away with. Like, there has to be a name, there has to be a person connected, because you're going to lose these families in talking to a different person every time, shift changes, all that kind of stuff. And if that person is going away on vacation or going away for the weekend or whatever it is, they need to hand off to another direct person.
I'm completely in sync with that, and that's the recommendation that I make to programs that I work with.
And what's funny is Jeff and I, we mention it all the time, but very few programs take us up on it. There is a thing in almost every phone system called skills-based routing. So you can set it up to have where if the call's coming in from Southworth and Associates, it can be routed to the person that has worked with them before.
Yeah.
And I think, we used to send some of our admissions staff, because admissions training is basically non-existent for most programs unless they're working with a consultant or something.
Yeah.
But I think sending staff to the intervention training, not that we're expecting them to be an interventionist, but you start to learn and pick up some of the education and some of the nomenclature and the voice that you need.
Yeah, and it creates consistent messaging, right? But yes, right. Admissions is an intervention, and that's the thing that I really stress when I go in and do clinical training with clinical teams or admissions teams, whatever it may be, is that what you're doing is an intervention as well. So really the intervention is the art of motivating individuals who are not motivated, and that can include the family members. And so a lot of these interventions are really getting the whole family on board first. I'm doing multiple interventions. I'm intervening on the dad who may hold the money but doesn't want to do it, and mom does want to do it. And so having that dialogue. Whereas training the admissions department how to do that as well, that's where you can really leverage interventionists, right? Bring them in, make your call center or your call staff better, or whoever it is you've got answering your phones, train those guys, to be consistent in the messaging and foster change within the family.
Have you ever thought about applying your skill set to college football recruiting? I could see you could be fabulous.
If you know someone that's looking for that, let me know, and I'm glad to stop by. So,
Well, it is. I mean, whether you mean to or not, I mean, what you're really describing is consultative selling.
Yeah.
What you're really describing is using the tools that you've learned as a clinician in motivational interviewing, and then really sort of getting people to say yes from somewhere else.
Yep.
And actually pull that through their being.
Yeah.
And get them so that it's their idea.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the podcast's over. No, just kidding.
No, I mean, but that's what it is. And I think that, and when I was a counselor, I thought sales was an ugly word, right? And this is a divide I see. When I was
going to ask you precisely that.
My programs, we had our admissions department call staff, and then we had our clinical team, and there was this friction always, right?
Yep.
And I see it, I'm sure you see it all the time, Lee, right? You go into these programs, and here you've got this clinical versus the admissions, and it's like, you guys just want money, and you're the money guys, and you guys, and then the clinical team just wants to scholarship everybody, and you guys just want to save everybody. And it's like half my time when I do consulting is going in and talking to these programs about, listen, without admissions, you don't have a job. So you can go counsel in a closet by yourself because you're not going to have a client. And you over here, you got to understand what these guys do is a sacred art. And so we got to find a balance here. And so, I think being able to tell that story is huge. But so back to the sales piece. So as a counselor, I thought it was ugly. And then I had a mentor of mine tell me, Ben, like, counseling is just sales. All you're doing is selling change, implementation of these new skills. You're selling the therapy modality. You're selling a new life. Like, that's all you're doing. And so when I really was able to bring that in, that sales is not an ugly word, I think that's something that any counselor, clinician needs to understand. And so
I think, Jeff and I mean, I use it all the time, that it's really, because almost every program, I don't want to talk about sales, but when you couch it that it's really motivational interviewing,
Different conversation.
Right.
Oh, okay. Well,
Right.
my clinical staff uses motivational. They use MI. Oh, yeah. That's what we're training your admissions team to do.
Exactly.
And it's really funny how we just have to. It's the same coin.
Yeah.
Is there another magical formula? Because you talk about the tension between admissions and clinical. And it's like in every program, regardless of how successful they are or how great they are, that tension is always going to be there, right? So aside from you won't have a job and these people do the magical art, are there any other rabbits to pull out, to pull out of that hat?
I think I love taking clinical staff to marketing events, right? Because,
Yes.
and ITCC, our event, is really like that, right? Because we say we want someone from business or ownership, and we want a clinician typically. But them seeing what goes on out here, like I have staff at home, a lot of times they're like, oh, have fun at your conference. They think I'm out playing golf and just going to fancy dinners and doing nothing. It's like, you don't understand the amount of work that happens into getting people to trust your program and refer to your program, or trust your intervention company and refer to your intervention company. That's a lot of work. And I think bringing those clinicians out, starting with your clinical director, taking them to a marketing event and letting them see what is going on out here in the world, that you don't just open a program and people magically come now. I mean, I think you got to understand, you could have the best clinical program in the world and it'll go out of business if you don't know how to market it.
Right.
And that was what we saw, I think, 10 years ago with the big internet shift was, we started to see these guys who knew the internet game, but they didn't know how to do treatment, and they were thriving. And then we saw these age-old brands that were trusted names in treatment, and they did great therapy, but they couldn't fill their beds. And so this huge shift happened. And so now I think that, and it's the same with interventionists, it's you got to know you got to be able to do all of it well. It's all got to be hitting to maintain a career in this space. So
from your vantage point, where are we in sort of that evolutional shift?
I think it's much more balanced now. I think we still see a lot of people who really know the marketing side and are doing, lackluster treatment. But what we've seen a lot of these players who do really good treatment, and a lot of the trusted names start to get hip with marketing, and they've had to, and throw in payer mix and insurance and all those changes. But we've really seen the good programs start to come out and say, okay, we need to really hit marketing hard. We got to stay relevant, and how do we do that? And I think that that's a big part of kind of what Lee's doing and you guys do, is going out and helping these trusted brands, the good guys, be able to tell their story, be able to market in ethical ways. And I think that, I've had the conversation with people where they say, well, call center is a dirty word. And I say, no, a call center is effectively is handling your calls. It's how you source those calls is where the ethics comes in. And that's the piece where I think that call center is not a dirty word. I mean, I think it's how you get your calls. Are you keywording on other people's names?
Yeah.
Are you doing these unethical things that we are supposedly trying to curb and to manage? And I think that that's where, the fight is nowadays. And I wear a lot of hats. We're going from intervention now to owning and operating treatment centers, which is something I'm very passionate about as well. And I think that I love this whole field. And as I step back and look at it, I think that we really need to get good at owning our media, owning our social media, owning our branding, and how we market ethically, and what does that look like, and how do the good guys do that? Because people get into this for the right reasons, but they want to work with the patient.
Yeah.
They want to work with the patient. They want to help the family, and all that other stuff falls by the wayside. So how do we manage all that?
I don't think some of these programs that have failed, especially recently, I don't think they got into this, they didn't mean to go down these paths. They all of a sudden get stuck when they've taken out loans and the bank's calling their note, or the private equity firm is like, well, you made this kind of commitment to me. And now all of a sudden you start cutting corners because you're almost forced financially to, and then it's a slippery slope.
Yep.
And I think that that's where, it's like, I think I said when we were talking with Nikki Soda, usually when we get the phone call, it's almost too late.
Yeah, things are not going well. When the phone rings, it's like they're not going to call when things are going great.
Yeah.
And usually it's about 3-4 months too late by the time they call, and it's like, okay, it's going to take a bit to dig out of this hole.
Well, and I get calls all the time, because I also do consulting and revenue cycle management, but I get calls from people that want to start programs, and they give me their pro forma, and we look at it, and the marketing budget is a fraction of what it needs to be.
Right.
And that's where I really have to right size expectations, right? If you want to get into this space, you need to really understand what it's going to cost to market your
programs that are
program.
calling us that are 50 beds and only want to spend $1,000 a month, in paid search. It's like,
But Lee, my clinical program is amazing. Yeah. I mean, to Ben's point, that's. I mean, we can sort of joke about it, but I mean, the reason we can joke about it is because there's truth in that. There are a lot of people who start programs who, like you said, Ben, they literally think, I just need to have the best possible product, and then the world will be a path to my door.
Yeah, and that's the disconnect that I think that we need to really right size. And anybody watching, I know that typically there's people watching these podcasts and things that say, I want to be an interventionist. I want to be, and I meet with people all the time that say, I want to do this work. What do I do? And it's, you got to pay your dues a little bit. It's going to take time to build a reputation. People need to know they can trust you, and it took me a long time to go from chasing, rough cases that like John Southworth, those guys would send us. They sent us all the stuff they didn't want, and so we had to generate our own calls and learn the internet and do those things. But all that to say that you've got to really, nowadays, to really be effective, you've got to have a strong marketing component.
And now, we're getting ready to be disrupted again with AI.
Yeah.
And so, it kind of like if you weren't kind of looking at TikTok and Reels and Shorts a couple years ago, if you're not already paying attention to the changes, you're going to be quickly disrupted, and you're going to be wondering, why does my great program not even show up, in search anymore? It's like it's coming very quickly.
So, Ben, I don't know if you know the statistics, but across our industry, there are certain industries that have been dramatically impacted by AI search. Ours happens to be one of them. Yeah. And so there are a number of programs out there that are seeing as much as 30% drop off their organic traffic. Mm-hmm. And the reality of it is there are some people out there that, first of all, don't even realize that traffic is missing. And then all of a sudden they see a lot less calls, and they just don't quite know what's going on there. So, I mean, what is your vantage point as you see that? And I'm asking you to put on sort of your treatment center owner hat now.
Because the demand hasn't dried up.
No.
Mm-hmm.
No.
It's interesting. I had a call with a guy the other day who works for Google, Meta, big time marketing firm, through a friend of a friend, and we were talking about some strategy we're going to do, and it's, you got to clean your sites up, is what he said. It's got to be simple. Like, he went to our site and he said, you got too much stuff on here that you do. And I hear that a lot. So I'm trying to hone in on, what do we do? What is our lane? And I think that in our space, everybody wants to be everything to all people, and we can't be. It's not effective. We're doing a disservice to our families. And so when I look at Southworth Associates is an intervention company, and we also do monitoring on the back end, but that is what we do. We are an intervention company, and we got to simplify our message for these families in crisis. And I think that, and I hate to use this term because it's so salesy, but sales funnels, right? Which, nobody was talking about sales funnels, 10 years ago or 15 years ago in our space, really. But what does that look like? What does our sales cycle look like? And how do we get the messaging clean and clear for families in crisis? And being aware of AI, what are the ways AI is going to impact my business, and how can I use it to my advantage? Because it's not all, you got to understand it, you got to study it, you got to learn about it. I don't know everything about it, but I go to people who do, and I need to learn about that and see how I can leverage that with my business. Because a treatment center owner can notes, documentation, how can I leverage this stuff to really be good? How can I use it to create content that helps increase my search traffic and helps the family know more about what I do? How can I use these things to my strength?
You obviously got some great advice in that phone call. And what I like to tell people is that the future iteration of how AI is going to impact the business, what we used to be able to do is be very broad. In terms of organic search.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that maybe your website had a lot of stuff on it.
Right.
The mantra that I like to use now, and I'd be curious, Lee, to get your take on this, and Ben, also yours, going forward, you don't want to be the best, you want to be the only. So the idea of really understanding who you are and who you serve, and just niche down and niche down and niche down so that you are truly the only voice for that customer, AI is going to be your friend.
Yeah.
But if you want to continue to be, I serve all people at all times for all things, AI is gonna wreck your world.
Yeah.
So how do you respond to that?
I'm guilty of it. I think we got to take inventory and look at what we're good at and what we're not. And I had a friend of mine say years ago, Ben, I've known you a long time. I don't even understand what you do. And I had to really, she was right.
Yeah.
And Southworth, we do a lot of things, but as far as what I do, I mean, for me, I've distilled down what is it Southworth does, what's our function, and our primary function is we're an intervention company that helps families in crisis. And whether that's an intervention or that's me passing you to a treatment center or a therapist or whoever that is, our goal is to be that first point of contact in crisis and get you to the right person. That's what we do. And so I think I've had to, like I said, take inventory, look at what is our messaging, how do I clean that up, and where can we do the max good to help these families. And that's what it is. And I think treatment centers need to do that. Owners, operators need to do that. Who do you work with? Who's your client? Who's your demographic? And what do you do best? And stay in that lane. And I think we've moved away. In the old days, it was like that. Michael's House was a good extended care, and Karen was a good primary treatment, and Betty Ford was a good primary treatment. They kept them 30 days. Now everybody's doing everything. They're a full continuum.
Right.
But who really works with the 15-year-old girl who needs treatment and it has trauma? Who does that? Who works with the 70-year-old male who got addicted to pain pills after a surgery and needs ongoing treatment and had no history of addiction up until his 70s? What do we do with that guy? Mm-hmm. So being really specific about what we do, we got to get back to that. Mm-hmm. We can't just be these huge, machines that take everybody. I mean, I think, and anyway, that's my soapbox.
I was going to just second what your consultant said about your website, because it used to be everything had to be on your website, right? And
right.
I think you're smart to go that route. Since my book launched yesterday, I was looking online to see how I was showing up, and when you search my name in the book, Gemini, the Google's AI, it was not showing my website, but it had this great narrative about the book, and it was referencing interviews I'd done on podcasts, on TV, and then it had the Amazon reviews and some of the book reviews that have come out. It wasn't just my website, which is what we're stuck in, right? A lot of people are stuck in that, and that's where the disruption is going to come. You still want to have, good architected site, but there's so many other things that AI can pull in now.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's why, and again, I think boiling it down to what do we want the front. I mean, you have to have content. You've got to be able to educate the family as they dig in, but you don't want to overwhelm them. And so I think architecture, how is that aesthetic still clean, simple to navigate, but still informational? Because, Google, AI, the search engines are all looking at educational content. How are you educating these families? They still want to see that.
So you mentioned ITCC, and I know we're bumping up against time, so I love ITCC. For those of you that don't know about it, please go to Southworth Associates website and read about it. But I remember what I love about it is that John didn't allow technology. Yeah. And I was telling you early, when I would go and present on marketing, I had to hand draw my slides. That was how I could at least show, hey, here's what an algorithm looks like, and here's the updates. And so I think it's a meaningful time where you really get to sit with not just the marketing people, but with the clinician, because I haven't met a CFO yet that didn't claim a marketing event was a boondoggle. Yeah. So I think I can honestly say for your program, you really meet and learn a lot.
And that's, I think, again, keeping it simple, boiling it down to connection, right? And bigger is not always better. And ITCC is small. And I will tell you, I have had the chance to grow that conference and do different things with it and make it bigger and more profitable. And we've fought to keep it small, intimate, invite only. We vet everybody who comes in. It's 3 days. There's no PowerPoint. There's no gimmicks. You've got to stay the whole time. No cell phone use when we're in session. Yeah. We will call you out. Yes. John was very good. John,
I know. He would sit right in the front.
Yep. And now these smart watches. Now I'm like, I see you. I see what you're doing there. You stop that email. You need to listen to who's on stage. But it's really more of a retreat. And here's what I boil it down to. It's like these big events. I see 1 million people. I can't remember who I saw. I've got cards, but I'm not building real connection. And I'm tired at the end. I feel drained. ITCC, you go. You know who you were with the last 3 days. You build meaningful connection, and your cup feels full, and you're inspired after. It's more like a retreat, but you're still making very solid contacts and building relationships.
And so you've got Vero in Florida, and then you've got West Coast.
Yep. We do 3 events a year. Sometimes we do a 4th, but the 3 solid that we do 2 in Vero Beach, spring and fall, and then we do San Diego in February.
Okay. And can we work Nashville into a 4th maybe at some point?
I mean, Actually, I mean, we are looking at doing a 4th event that rotates around the country.
Okay.
So that is something. We did one in Ohio, and Nashville, these are the markets I want to hit, is kind of the center of the country where I think a lot of times, people.
Okay, I know you came with Steve Lee this morning, so we got to we're going to have to put the screws to Steve and say, let's go, Steve. Let's host one.
Yeah, Steve will give me a room over at Cumberland.
We know some people that could help in Nashville.
Yeah, I mean, look, Nashville's a great market. I love Nashville, and there's so much good treatment here. Obviously, a lot of big providers are here, so I'm not saying it's a no. Not saying it's no, but so Texas is fighting with you. Texas and Nashville are both pulling me.
So Ben, we're not going to break news on this podcast. Is that right?
We can't do it. We can't do a pre-announcement.
I mean, if you're writing the check, we can I'm glad to make that announcement right now.
Well, just so everybody knows, we will drop in the show notes all the contact points if you have any questions about Southworth Associates, or if you just want to make a good connection and a good friend. I recommend people reach out to Ben and his company and really make a good, meaningful connection.
No, I appreciate that.
So Ben, as we're wrapping things up, is there anything that you would like to bring up that we haven't touched on?
No, I think the key takeaways are, get a mentor. Get a mentor. If you're new, whatever you want to be, if you want to be a CEO, if you want to be a counselor, if you want to be an interventionist, I am glad to mentor guys, and I have stepped into that role more, and I want to do more of that. So if you're looking at, hey, I want to be an interventionist or I want to build a treatment center, call me, and I'm doing I just moved to LA from Boise. Our company's still based in Boise, but I'm in LA now, so. I'm excited to be out there and helping families in crisis in that area. So if you need something or a mentorship or I can point you towards something, call me. I'm trying to give freely.
You probably like more direct flights now than all the connections in Boise.
I told a buddy of mine the other day, I said, the scary thing is I'm most excited. I'm closer to my family. All these things are great, but I'm most excited about nonstop flights.
Nonstop flights, exactly.
And your frequent flyer mile thing, I'm probably up there with, I think we're probably.
I think you're close to John now.
John was like Delta Royal. They were calling him in the hospital. His Marriott rep and Delta reps were calling.
I can totally believe that.
Oh my goodness.
Well, that's a really generous offer, and I hope certainly anyone who wants to advance their career would take you up on that. So Ben, that's a really generous offer.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, guys.
Well, guys, that's a wrap for today's episode. Ben, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your perspective on interventions, compliance monitoring, and the vital role of supporting professionals in recovery. If you'd like to learn more about Ben's work, check out southworthassociates.net. And to our listeners, if today's conversation sparked new insights, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your colleagues. Until next time, this is MasterMined, signing off.
That wraps up this episode of MasterMined. Thank you so much for joining us. And remember, MasterMined is not just a podcast, it's a community. So don't forget to comment, subscribe, and review us. Your feedback helps us continue to bring you content that's relevant and relatable. Thanks again to our sponsor, Snapshot, a digital media marketing agency. And thank you for joining us on MasterMined, your behavioral health playbook.